Let's go ahead and start with that border story. We've been monitoring it over the weekend. So Ryan and I were able to bring everybody the immediate news that the Texas governor was going to continue building fencing and wire on the border. This was after the Supreme Court ordered the Texas National Guard not to get in the way of federal authorities from cutting said border wire. There's a standoff there between the Biden administration and the Texas governor. The Texas governor then exploiting a loophole in the decision saying, well, I won't get in the way of the feds if they want to cut the wire, but that doesn't mean that I can't build even more wire if I want to, escalating then into a major standoff nationally. Let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. We've got a map here, a map in red. Anybody want to wonder? No, it is not the Civil War A24 map. This is actually a map of all of the Republican governors and 25 states now in the union who are supporting the Texas quote-unquote constitutional right to self-defense, according to the RGA, which put out this graphic. So you've basically got every Republican state in the country except for the state of Vermont. Vermont there, well, at least every Republican state with a Republican governor except for the state of Vermont that is backing Governor Abbott, as well as some of these states sending specific National Guard assets to the border to help the Texas National Guard continue to increase the amount of border fencing and wire that is there. This actually comes on top of major negotiations here in Washington over a border package. The idea, if you guys will recall, tying the border package to Ukraine aid funding, but that now appears to be going down in flames after former President Donald Trump and now the GOP frontrunner says he does not want that to pass. That is ruffling some feathers in the Senate for Republicans who wanted to try and get this negotiated. Here's what Senator James Lankford from Oklahoma had to say.
Why give him this in an election year, the cover of this deal that critics say is still going to let a lot of people in, but he gets to take a victory lap that he's gotten something done?
Yeah, well, it's definitely not going to let a bunch of people in. It's focused on actually turning people around on it. It is interesting. Republicans 4 months ago would not give funding for Ukraine, for Israel, and for our southern border because we demanded changes in policy. So we actually locked arms together and said, we're not going to give you money for this. We want a change in law. And now it's interesting, a few months later, when we're finally getting to the end, they're like, oh, just kidding. I actually don't want a change in law because it's a presidential election year. We all have an oath to the Constitution, and we have a commitment to say we're going to do whatever we can to be able to secure the border.
So what do you make of all this, Krystal? There's a lot going on here. We missed you whenever you weren't here. It was mildly enjoyable to have some of the Civil War maps again go viral, reigniting some of that discourse. But the border deal collapse is probably the bigger headline story out of all of this because it was probably the last chance to get anything done before the 2024 election. And now they're going to basically keep it in the election, considering how the House Republicans and the Speaker are saying this is an absolute no-go for us.
Just quickly on the Supreme Court decision that you referenced there and this sort of potential constitutional crisis, it seems like both sides have somewhat de-escalated on that front and avoided the worst of what could have happened there. So that is good. Obviously, I think the Supreme Court very clearly decided this correctly, that it's the federal government that has authority here. And already the actions of the Texas National Guard and of Governor Abbott probably led to the death of three migrants, including a mother and two children, who the U.S. authorities were unable to reach in order to rescue them. So on that piece, obviously, I think the Supreme Court was correct. And I think that all of these governors around the country, and this dovetails with the other piece, they love to use this as a political issue. They love to do symbolic stunts, such as the willingness to send their own National Guard troops down to the border. But apparently, many Republicans much less interested in actually governing when it comes to this issue. And so it's sort of adorable to see Senator Lankford, who thought hey guys, I thought we actually cared about this. I thought we actually wanted these measures imposed. Here we negotiated a deal that gets 90% of what we've been asking for. And suddenly you are making it plain as day that it is more important to you to have a political wedge issue, a cudgel to use against President Biden, than you are interested in actually living up to the rhetoric and solutions that you claim to support. Now, for me personally, I don't support this legislation. I think it's draconian. I don't think it will deal with the problem. I think, it's incredibly harsh. And just on the enforcement side, doesn't deal with any of the root cause issues, doesn't do nearly enough to eliminate the asylum backlog that really is sort of at the center of all of this. So I'm happy that the House Republicans are interested in blocking it, but it just shows you, to me, Saagar, and I'm very curious on your take as well. Like, it's a perfect example of how fake our politics are, how much of all of what these people are saying, I'm not just talking about Republicans now, but Democrats too, it's just like political signaling. I mean, Roe versus Wade is a perfect example on the Democratic side. They would rather have it as an issue than solve the problem. Trump and the threat to democracy on the Democratic side, they would rather have it as an issue than actually put forward a candidate that could defeat Donald Trump as an example. And I think it's the same thing here with the border. These people have been running around acting like it's an invasion and this is existential and this is a war on our country. And when they're actually offered a deal that could do some of what they claim they want, now we can't give Joe Biden a win in an election year. So it shows you where their priorities actually are.
I'm very conflicted because I think rhetorically it sounds good. I will say on that drowning incident, it is in dispute from the Texas side, and they say that it's actually the Mexicans' fault that that happened, but we can put that aside because the facts on that have yet to be completely clear. It's complicated because when we think about this as a fix to the border, it's not necessarily one, because if we look back at some of the executive actions that the Biden administration took immediately after Trump, and I'm basically channeling the case for the House Republicans here. They're like, listen, you removed the emergency declaration of the border, you stopped using the pandemic restrictions previously, you tried to get us out of remain in Mexico, and you've continued to embrace the asylum policy. So it's not a problem of legislation. If you simply enforce the law, then we wouldn't be continuing to have this problem. In that case, they are true. Now I'll give the Democratic side of this, which is that no president of the last four administrations has actually enforced fully immigration law because Congress has not given them the requisite resources to actually, quote unquote, deal with the problem. We're talking here, as you reference, asylum judges. Allegedly, this border deal does include some asylum judges and increase in some of the backlog, but it doesn't focus on some of the problems that we have in general of people who are economic migrants taking advantage of an asylum-like system. So if I were to look at this purely from a Republican point of view, I'd be like, no, screw you, man. Like, I'm not going to hold hostage aid to a foreign country, of which I don't even particularly want, for a problem that you created. Some of the details to here, Krystal, are that this would effectively, as I understand it, the full legislation has not been released. They would allow 5,000, so the border would close after 5,000 migrants have passed per day. Now, you can quickly do the math of what 5,000 is currently, and you could see that it's several 100,000 people that would continue to be allowed in and effectively legalize illegal immigration through some sort of quasi-like bargain system without any bargaining chips on the Republican side. So the issue, I think, is A, this still legalizes like illegal mass migration, number one. But
no,
two, well, no, I mean, 5,000 people who are coming across a border, that's illegal. Go ahead.
Yeah, but Saagar, it's not like 5,000's come across and it's just like, and you're scot-free and you get to go.
And you're mostly
the idea is if you hit a daily average of 5,000, they can shut down the border and completely end due process and like throw out any semblance of following our laws or international laws, which is why I think this is an outrageous approach. So it's the polar opposite of what you're saying. The idea here is not 5,000 get to go in free. It's if we hit that limit, then we're going to do away with due process and completely shut the border. That's exactly the sort of hardline tactics that Republicans have claimed that they want. In addition, with regard to it, being tied together with Ukraine and the Israel aid, I mean, that's as much because of the Republicans as it is because of the Democrats. They claimed, and that's what Langford was saying, like, you guys claimed you wanted to put these two together. We put it together. We negotiated the deal. And now when you see it, you're like, nah, it's an election year. We didn't actually want this. And lastly, with regard to executive action, I mean, it is always better to actually have legislation versus these one-off executive action pieces. So I think that's nonsense that they're suddenly like, no, we don't want to have anything to do with it. You just handle it. You just deal with it with your limited powers that you have as president. And as you said, even if Joe Biden said, like, I want to enforce the law in as draconian manner as possible, he just literally doesn't have the resources. And to back up for people who, may not be totally enmeshed in the details, and this is something, you and I have discussed many times, Sarah, I know you agree with this. A big core of the problem here is the asylum process. There's no doubt about that. You have 3 million case backlog in the asylum courts. What that means is that people around the world at this point. This has taken on a life of its own. We're not just talking about Central and South America. We're talking about people coming from really all over the globe who know that they can show up and whether or not they have a legitimate asylum claim can say, I claim asylum. And it's going to be years before their case works through the system. That is really the core of the problem. And so this deal, again, which I don't support because of the draconian measures I just spoke to, but this deal does have additional asylum judges. I doubt it's sufficient. I doubt it will get rid of the 3 million case backlog that really is like the crux of this issue. But I think if you're not talking about that piece, then you're not serious about dealing with the problem. And to me, it just reveals like especially the House Republicans and certainly Donald Trump, are not actually serious about dealing with the problem. They don't actually live up to this rhetoric of like, oh my God, it's an invasion and it's the worst thing that's happening in the entire world. They like it as a political issue and they want to hold on to those images at the border and being able to solely blame Biden and run on it for Trump for 2024. That's what they really want.
I think some of that can be true, but I respectfully disagree because if 5,000 people are going to be crossing per day, and as you're saying, deny them due process, we're giving people due process before. It was in Mexico, and you just had to wait there. Biden administration has reversed that policy. Now you get to come to this country. After 180 days, you get a work permit. It takes years to go through the asylum process. It's not fair. It's just not fair to people who are in the U.S. Most of these people are prime age working males who are, basically working low-paid jobs. This is good for big business, but I don't think it's fair to anybody who's involved, including the migrants and including us. But, I mean, it is, to me, I think it's effectively legalized mass immigration. You're gonna have hundreds of thousands of people who are coming here, who are economic migrants, are not asylum seekers. The vast majority of them have their asylum claims who are dismissed at the eventual trial. They're allowed to stay here for years and years and years, and they're allowed to work. I mean, that's basically mass migration. I mean, it's one of those where they're allowed to stay. Now, in terms of deportation, haven't had any mass deportation in this country, actually basically since Obama, which is an inconvenient thing for Trump. Trump says that he's going to do it whenever he comes back. We'll see. But this
Biden
is where I
has
think
deported more people than Trump, by the way. But,
pardon?
Biden has deported more people than Trump has. But again, the 5,000 thing, I just think I don't think it's fair the way that you're framing it. Because again, this is actually the most draconian part of this legislation. It's not that the 5,000 people that come in, they just get a free pass. I mean, what we have right now.
They get to claim asylum.
Yeah,
that's free pass. Yeah.
That's Saagar. That's how it works right now. What this is saying is after 5,000, that's it. Then there's no more due process. Then even people who have legitimate asylum claims, which some people truly do, they don't get their chance. They don't get to make their case. And I think that is wildly unfair. But I just think it's very dishonest to frame that as like, oh, these 5,000 is just a free pass and you're greenlighting this many, 100,000 migrants a month. You can already look at the number they're coming across. The numbers are very high. I don't deny that whatsoever. So it's the polar opposite. It's that you are cutting off the number of people who get to come in and claim asylum. Right now, there is no limit. They're saying, okay, we're going to put in this 5,000 limit, which again, I don't support. But if you are an immigration hardliner, I don't see how you look at that and think that that's a step backward. That is a step forward if you are an immigration hardliner.
Well, I would put it this way, and I do consider myself a relative immigration hardliner, which is I think these people should all apply for asylum in Mexico. And then if they're legitimately allowed, then they can come in. That's probably going to be less than 1% of them. Right now, we have an insane situation. All of these Somalians and people from all over the world, as you said, who are just coming across the border. They're going to stay here for years and years, and the likelihood of their deportation is nearly zero, even if they do commit crimes. And this is exactly kind of where I get to the issue about sovereignty means that you get to have control. Now, in this, you're going to have some modicum of control. Again, I would channel the House Republicans' case, which I think is fair, is that you created a problem which genuinely did not exist as badly under Trump because you removed the Remain in Mexico policy and you fought tooth and nail in the Supreme Court in order to allow this mass asylum-like process, allowing to the release of approximately 6 to 8 million people over the last 3 years. That's genuinely disorderly, and that's dramatically much more than happened under Trump. Now, Trump had a couple of things to his benefit. He had Remain in Mexico, but really what saved him is the pandemic, if we're all being honest. He was allowed to use the pandemic-era policy at that time and CDC guidelines to basically make it so that people were not allowed to come in, and even the limited amount under Remain in Mexico were able to enter the country. The issue, I think, again, though, comes back to a question of politics, and I don't think that you're wrong. I don't think that you are incorrect because Trump himself actually admitted this. We could take a listen to what he said at the rally where he's like, you're damn right. I want to take credit for killing this border deal. Let's play it.
We cannot let this happen to our country. As the leader of our party, there is zero chance I will support this horrible open borders betrayal of America. It's not going to happen. I noticed that, and I'll fight it all the way. I noticed a lot of the senators are trying to say respectfully, they're blaming it on me. I said, that's okay. Please blame it on me. Please. Because they were getting ready to pass a very bad bill. And I'll tell you what, a bad bill is, I'd rather have no bill than a bad bill. A bad bill you can't have, and that's what was happening.
So that backs up what you're saying. I think we can be honest, at least, about that. Trump is seriously like, I would rather have no bill than a bad bill. And I would also say this for people who share some of my immigration politics. If people want to go and watch Reihan Salam and others, they warn that if you have an incompetent president who has immigration views that are like this, and if you have bad execution, as we genuinely saw under Trump, where he was unable to get a bill passed, then you end up actually having some of the worst of both worlds. But curious for your reaction to the Trump segment.
Yeah, I mean, he just says it out in the open, right? I mean, listen, there was, I can't remember who it was, one of the Republican senators who early on was like, listen, Republicans, you're not going to get a better deal than this under Trump. And the reason you're not going to get a better deal is because there is no way in hell that Democrats would allow an enforcement-only bill with zero provisions for dreamers, with no pathway to citizenship for anyone. There is no way in hell they would agree to that under Donald Trump. The only reason that any of them would agree to this, which goes directly against everything they've said that they stand for on immigration for the past number of years, is because there's a Democratic president. So when you're talking about government, and again, I'm glad they're blocking this bill because I don't support it. But if you're talking about governance, it's not, is this the perfect, ideal, everything that I want under the sun bill? It's, you said that this is an incredibly important problem. You said that these are some of the methods that you would go about fixing it. And now that it's on the table, do you actually care about the issue, or do you just want to grandstand? And clearly Trump is indicating like, no, I just want to grandstand. I want to use this as a wedge issue. And there are other Republicans who are even more forthright about not wanting to give Biden a quote unquote win in an election year. So it's led to people like James Lankford, and there are others who are like, wait a second, who were sincere apparently about the issue. And now that it's here, they're confused that, oh, it turns out the rest of you people weren't actually serious when you were making these claims. You just like the issue. You like the problem hanging out there. You like to use it to beat up the Democrats and beat up Joe Biden, and you're not actually serious. That's what, it appears to me. And when on the Remain in Mexico policy, I mean, just because you made the point, like Biden wanted to get rid of it. The court said he couldn't. It's still in place. So it's not like, that's a major, that's a lot of the Trump era immigration policy has actually remained in place. This would provide this president, and by the way, if Trump gets elected, him as well, with more power, more like hardcore enforcement power at the border. So if this is an important issue for you, if you're an immigration hardliner, if you believe these measures are actually going to do something, everybody that is on that side should be supporting it. And the fact that they're not shows you they'd rather play politics.
I think it's tough, Krystal. So I would put it to you this way. This is important as to Republicans as it is healthcare to people who support Bernie Sanders. So it's like, well, this is not even Obamacare, like in terms of what it would mean for healthcare if we're going to put it in the comparable thing. Now, should you support it because it legally might get through? Maybe. Or are you going to keep fighting for basically the best of what you can get if you were able to take the House, the Senate, which, it's very much within the realm of possibility that Republicans control those, and then
they're not going to get a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate. That's a fantasy.
Okay, but I would put it this way then. I mean, does that mean you should stop fighting for, Medicare for all or something, like in comparison terms?
No, but Saagar, if public option was on the table, even though it's not my ideal solution, I would say go for it.
I don't think this is public option,
if expanding Social Security was on the table, which, it was at one point during Build Back Better, I wouldn't say no because I just want to have this issue to run on in the next election. I would say, no, this is going to help people. This is important to me. We should embrace it and live to fight another day and keep pushing for more of what, the direction that we think we should go in.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I think just because the enforcement only is on the migration side and it doesn't deal with the illegal immigration side here already, it does actually set up for, some sort of future fight, which definitely could go against Republicans. In terms of Speaker Mike Johnson, let's put this up there on the screen. He threw cold water on this. I've actually been basically saying this from the beginning because I've been talking to some of the people who are involved. And they're like, look, the entire Senate deal is fake regardless because Johnson is already in huge trouble right now in the Republican caucus because of some of the spending deals that he's cut. If he allowed some sort of asylum and immigration bill to go through, the Freedom Caucus and a lot of the immigration hardliners, who barely he has 2 or 3 votes that that are keeping him from getting his ass thrown out, just like Kevin McCarthy, he would have the same issue. So he tweeted out, quote, President Biden falsely claimed yesterday he needs Congress to pass a new law to allow him to close the southern border. He knows that's untrue. As I explained to him in a letter last year and have specifically reiterated to him, he can take executive action immediately to reverse the catastrophe he has created. That's kind of what I was talking about in the previously when I was trying to channel some of the House Republican and some of the more hardline talking points that I've seen who are out there. Anyway, I'm curious what you think, Krystal, just in terms of how this will move forward, because one thing is correct, even if you can this is getting a lot of attention and all that. Immigration is the worst issue for Joe Biden. And the longer this goes on, it is worse for him. I mean, if anything, if I were to say that Biden won the election if we were to sit here in 2024 after Election Day, I'd be like, he won because of Roe, and he won because, basically Roe and Trump insanity. And if I were to say that Trump won, I would say he won because of Biden's age, and immigration were probably the top 2 things that would contribute to that.
Yeah, I think this is the worst issue. Well, it's one of the worst issues for Joe Biden. I also think Israel has become a really bad issue for Joe Biden
for different reasons.
Because of his own base and how opposed they are to his approach. So there's a lot going on. But, there's a lot of analysis from liberals who basically are like, see how clever Joe Biden is. He offered this draconian bill, and now Republicans are being exposed as not caring about the issue, which, I think that is true. But I don't really think that message is going to be successful. I don't know that people are following the ins and outs to realize that Republicans have been exposed as just wanting to shamelessly demagogue on this issue and not actually interested in solving the problem. So I don't really agree with that analysis. And there was a study that just came out. It focused on European countries, but, as we've discussed before, a lot of the politics globally and certainly in Europe is like downstream and connected to what is going on here as well. And Biden is not the first center-left president to try to win electorally by basically adopting hard right positions on immigration specifically. And there was just a new political science study that came out that was like, this doesn't work. It's not successful because you are giving credence to the arguments being made by the other side. Why would voters take like the watered down version of the argument versus, the real genuine article in Donald Trump? No one's going to think Joe Biden is harder on the border or harder on immigrants than Donald Trump. And you're going to alienate the people in your own coalition who disagree with you on this issue, and you're going to, really undermine their enthusiasm for your candidacy. So I definitely disagree with those who are out there who think that this is like a brilliant political maneuver by Joe Biden. I don't think so at all. I think it's very likely to backfire and, not help him to win re-election. I think it's foolish all the way around.
I agree with that. There's no way you can out-immigration Donald Trump. I mean, it's just not going to happen. Because even at 5,000, he's going to talk about the issue all day. It's not like the images are going to stop, right? And it's like, well, he could still say, it's like, look, I'll get it to 0. It's one of those where even if he can't do it, he can say it. So rhetorically, I think that immigration voters in general, I guess the only case for it would be to try and get it out of the news. But I don't see that happening either. Like we just said, it's going to be an issue whether people like it or not. That's a really interesting study. I need to check that out. If I had to guess, it's like you said, is that if you're centrist, you're just never going to be able to placate voters for whom this is the #1 issue. And this is the #1 issue for Republicans. Like, I think it's and politically, just consider this. If you're an immigration voter, you're almost 100%, or immigration hardline voter, you are almost 100% voting in a GOP primary. Like you are almost 100% going to vote for the Republican candidate.
Right.
Joe Biden is not going to cross you over. Now, in terms of
Right.
people who are upset about it and feel like it's chaotic and others, I could maybe see the case, for Biden. But, the left coalition point is not as an important one as well, because if you already got problems here with Israel, now you're going to have some problems with the immigration groups and all this. And I'm skeptical as to their actual political power, like nationally, but I definitely accept their political power intra-coalitionally with the Democratic Party. They could cause real issues for him if something like this went through, and for a lot of other Democratic candidates. So, yeah, I think it's a bit of a wash. I think you're right. And I do think Trump will probably come out on top.
Yeah, I mean, we've had elections before where Republicans really tried to make immigration the central issue. I think in 2016, it was one of the central issues, and it was obviously successful. Donald Trump got elected. In 2018, there was a big push to use this to like migrant caravan. You remember all that situation, and it wasn't successful. In red states, I think that and the combination of the migrant caravan thing and Kavanaugh sort of locked in Republican voters and kept them from straying from the flock, kept them energized, and perhaps blocked some upset elections in red states across the country. But with swing voters, it was not successful. And my guess would be that, we've seen in the midterms this last time around, like they were trying to make immigration a thing. They're certainly trying to make the economy a thing. And other issues won the day. I think, like you said, the people who are mostly voting on immigration are already Republicans. I think they're already going to vote for Donald Trump. I don't think Joe Biden, no matter how much of an immigration hardliner he tries to make himself appear at this point, I don't think there's any way in hell he's going to win any of those voters at this point. So I would be very surprised if immigration ends up being the issue that wins the day. And then the last thing I'll say about it is, there are some signs that not only is the economy somewhat improving, but that voters are starting to feel a little bit better about the economy. And concerns about the economy and concerns about immigration go hand in glove. You know, if you've got people who feel very insecure about their own finances, they're looking for an outlet like that for, what's going wrong for me. And it's classic. People come in, the politicians like Trump are happy to come in and say it's their fault. It's the immigrants' fault. They're the ones who are ruining your town, taking your job, et cetera, et cetera. People are much more open to that message when they feel very economically insecure. So that'll be the other piece that's really important is how do people continue to marginally feel a bit better about the economy as we move towards Election Day, or do they feel really insecure and are more open to those messages? So that's the other thing. I don't think those two issues are not separate, I guess is what I would say, how the economy is doing and how people feel about immigration.
No question. It's not an accident that major immigration politics spiked in the 1980s after the problems of the 1970s and after the 2008 financial crisis. Absolutely correct. The only X factor I would say is some of these blue cities like New York, Chicago, and others having a lot of migrants get bussed up there. That could maybe be the only way that I could see some of the dynamics change, because that's relatively new post-2022, at least at scale, in terms of stressing issues. But that doesn't mean New York is going to go red. It could mean that it could go, less blue than before. Maybe it actually might change the popular vote, but we'll see. And I'm curious to see how it shakes out.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.